$5 million in retirement should last forever, right? Well, in this case, it didn't. A couple, Don and Diane, both age 60 years old, retired with a nest egg of $5 million. In addition, they had a plan that they thought was tidy and neat, and they were ready to rock and roll with their lives. Unfortunately, they watched that money evaporate over time. And it wasn't just one big mistake that they made, but rather a series of issues that occurred slowly but surely. These tiny oversights weren't terribly noticeable at first, but today I'm going to address them. And we're going to cover lifestyle creep, stealth taxes, a rigid withdrawal system, and not understanding how discretionary spending can add up over time. We're going to break down what failed, where everything turned, the 5-step approach that I've used over time to help clients turn a situation around, and what the potential outcomes were. So let's walk through year one. Again, Don and Diane, early 60s, had $5 million saved up across various accounts, including pre-tax, Roth, and non-retirement, their mortgage fully paid off, and their kids off into the world's successes on their own. On paper, their plan seemed clear. $180,000 a year in after-tax spending, a 60-40 portfolio which should endure both inflation and market volatility, and a full understanding, or so they thought, of their expenses. Social Security starting at 67 for one spouse, which was full retirement age, and the other staggered at age 70, which would allow Social Security to accumulate and build a larger survivor benefit. The assumptions, in theory, were reasonable. Returns of 5 to 7% over time, adjusting for inflation of 2.5 to 3.5%. They built a monthly budget, which they thought was in great order, including expenses for housing, clothing, utilities, food, and miscellaneous. Their 3-month cash buffer felt comfortable, so they thought. If something were to pop up as an emergency, they'd have it covered. And why the math worked from day one? Well, if the markets offered moderate returns, all should be in good order. But the reality of the fact of the matter is that although they thought they had everything aligned with their plan, those miscellaneous expenses crept up over time. And miscellaneous is exactly where I've seen time and time again that budgets go to hide. Keep in mind a very important factor here. When you're in retirement, you tend to have a little more free time than you would so in your working years. And what this could equate to is a few more trips, maybe dining out more frequently, or a renovation on the house, or even a down payment for a child. And although none of this might feel reckless, it's actually these specific expenses that people miss, which again can cause complete chaos down the road. And in Don and Diane's case, none of this felt reckless. They thought that they deserved to dine out a bit more, to do the extra home renovation, to upgrade their flights more frequently, and to have fun because they worked their whole lives in saving their money to do so. And over time, Don and Diane's travel expanded quietly. Their plan had accounted for 2 trips a year, which eventually transformed into 4, and then 6. In the same breath, those once-in-a-lifetime ventures ended up recurring in the next lifetime. And the truth is, once Don and Diane tried these conveniences and started to really love the way that they were living, it became very hard for them to make change and turn back. And the biggest miss on their part was no spending cap. In addition to that, no 90-day review. If they separated their fixed costs from their variable costs and outlined those variable costs diligently from day one, there might have been a different story and a different outcome. And even developing a soft spending cap could have brought change. Rather than maybe 2 or 3 bucket list items per year, they choose 1. Maybe push the home renovation out another year. Maybe see how the portfolio is performing over time and use any excess earnings that weren't accounted for in the original plan to do some of these items. Let me show you a simple guardrail to consider that Don and Diane did not use. Set a spending ceiling, 1 monthly transfer, and use any additional raises as nothing more than temporary until it holds for 2 consecutive quarters. This alone can help to keep lifestyle growth tethered, rather than letting it run away. But without it, Don and Diane allowed their expenses to drift upwards of 25 to 30% higher by year 3. And again, none of it felt uncomfortable. It actually felt quite pleasant, but unfortunately, it was pretty darn expensive. This spending drift actually led to the next domino in what ended up being a cascade of events. They had to increase withdrawals from their retirement accounts. And with increased withdrawals came increase in taxes, increase in Medicare premiums, and eventually IRMAA. And the tax squeeze started quietly. They had a few capital gains here and there in their non-retirement oriented accounts, and that eventually led to withdrawals from their IRAs. And as odd as it may sound, an increase in spending could cause an increase in taxes, which could then lead to an increase in withdrawals to pay for those taxes. And now we've created a feedback loop where you have higher taxes and higher withdrawals over and over again, and it's not terribly easy to reverse this course. So what are you left to do, you might ask? Well, here's how I would approach the situation. First things first, I would address reality. And the facts here are that the portfolio ends up being dramatically lower than it was supposed to be, not due to market downturns, but due to 25 to 30% higher spending. The withdrawal rate, which was once about 3.5%, ended up elevating to over 5.5% due to increases in taxes. And in turn, this brought about a totally new risk profile that needed to be taken on by Don and Diane. Next, we conduct a full spending audit, taking a look at 3 to 6 months of spending. And this is not a session for judgment, but more so to collect data. In their case, travel more than doubled assumptions. Dining out was more than 3 times what they had planned for. And gifts and help to family members, although small on one-off basis, compounded over time. To boot, those one-off home projects ended up occurring in 11 out of the last 12 months. And we can't leave healthcare out of the equation, because that also typically ends up leading to another major surprise for folks in retirement. Medicare Parts B and D, IRMAA, vision, and dental all amounted to much more than Don and Diane had accounted for in their original spending plan. It wasn't a waste, it was simply life, and it needed a number so it could be planned for. The next step I take is modeling for taxes currently and also going forward. And here's where the conversation can get a little emotional. Because at the end of the day, you worked your whole life and saved diligently so you could enjoy yourself in retirement, not to have to cut back. But what I can tell you is that having personally walked through these turnarounds in multiple instances through the course of my career with clients, I have seen the power of small changes compound and in many cases have positive effects. Now let's turn this story into a quick checklist that you can consider if you find yourself in this conundrum. Step 1, start with the spending ceiling. 1 monthly transfer that hits your bank account and that's it. Treat any raises as temporary and allow multiple months to go by. Maybe you consider doing a quarterly true-up to make sure that everything is nice and neat. If travel, dining, gifts, or projects are running hot, consider pulling the next quarter of spending expenses forward. Or simply cool off. Split your budget into 2 buckets. First, your necessities. What does it cost to live, and what do you need to survive on a day-to-day? The other bucket is your discretionary expenses. That's where all the fun things occur. And try giving those one-offs soft caps. Because the reality is, if a one-off occurs more than once, it's not one-off. Step 2, tax planning. Before January ends, try to come up and model out what your modified adjusted gross income is going to look like for the year based on your spending needs. Layer in your income sources, in addition to folding in any potential IRMAA costs. If you're in a gap year before Social Security and RMDs, you could consider Roth conversions, as this might be a prime time to take advantage of them. Consider converting just enough to keep your modified adjusted gross income below any unnecessary IRMAA thresholds. And revisit this again in mid-year and also in November to ensure you're taking advantage of any potential conversions or having a full understanding of where your income and capital gains are for the year. And consider coordinating Social Security with taxes, where you're not looking at it solely in a vacuum. Maybe use dynamic withdrawals instead of rigid ones, where in different years you might have different income levels. For example, if your portfolio is 10 to 12% higher than where you forecasted it would be, maybe you give yourself a temporary raise. However, on the flip side, if you're experiencing a dramatic market correction, maybe you try to slow down as much as possible. Step 3, fix your cash problem by being intentional. Visualize what that number looks like to you and what makes you feel good, and have a plan as to how you can get there. I find many times having a plan in place can help to eliminate the emotion in decision making. And step 4 is rebalancing with a set of rules. This can be done whether by simply choosing calendar dates or utilizing tolerance bands. Say one asset class ends up moving 10 to 15% higher than you had modeled for originally, consider structured rebalancing. This can also be a great way to try to help keep risk aligned with your personal feelings and goals, in addition to implementing, essentially by default, the buy low, sell high philosophy. And step 5, get your healthcare needs and expenses under control and have a full understanding. This in itself could be an entire planning review, Do not guess when it comes to your health care. Adding up all of the factors involved, including Medicare Parts B and Part D, potentially anything that has to do with any IRMAA thresholds, and any additional out-of-pocket expenses. If you want to take things the extra step, I actually like to model out, God forbid, what were to happen if one spouse were to not be in the picture anymore, and then take into account how does that look as far as single filing for taxes and different sources of income and how their life might be impacted. And a few items that I would consider to be operational wins. Think about using a budgeting app. And maybe you get an alert when your spending hits 80% of a particular threshold. In addition, task out a day annually to review all of your subscriptions and commit to cutting some of them. And treat charitable giving like a budgeted line item. Do that with intention as well, and consider in higher income years contributing to a donor-advised fund. I have found it helpful over time to have an understanding and make the mindset shift that these are simply guardrails. They're not about deprivation. And being able to look yourself in the mirror and understand how your system works can maybe make your money movement work more efficiently for you. I always say, consider forming these rules when you're calm and in an even-keeled environment. Because the last thing you want to do is add emotion into the decision when you're going through a market panic, a sell-off, or an emergency in life. Now, if you're getting your retirement planning in order for the new year, check out our next video here.